Alive and alert on the north side of the dirt. It is your man D Real coming at you with another Be Real with D Real, where edutainment explains it. And I am going to be explaining, clarifying, postulating about some things on this fine January 15th morning, aka Martin Luther King Day. Let me get this out the way. Shouts out to the friends, family, people still existing, as well as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was a fixture in the civil rights movement and is responsible for a lot of the civil rights stuff we see that is in place today, or he was a catalyst or a heavy petitioner for it. And for that, you know what I'm saying, a debt we can never repay to the man. He gave everything, including his life. Now, I, in my research this weekend, stumbled across some interesting revelations with regard to the Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Professor Xavier Magneto chestnut, right? Okay, we've always believed that's what it is, and at this point in time, I'm not going to tell you not to, but I will present evidence and let you draw your conclusion. But before we get off into that, we're going to do what we need to do so we can do what we want to do. Comment, like, subscribe, and share the Be Real with D Real page so that when new material comes out, you get it. If you're digging what a brother's shoveling, put some dirt in my bucket. Comment, like, subscribe, and share, because edutainment is what I do. Now, here's what I'm going to do. First thing I'm going to do is we're talking about what we're talking about here. Martin and Malcolm, Xavier Magneto, two sides of the same coin. Now, before I tell you about the two sides of the same coin, I'm going to read an article to you from Screen Rant. And this article was published on August 21st, 2021. So that's almost 3 years ago. And this is what we've been talking about. Professor X and Magneto were not based on Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Oh my. Oh my. So we don't get no imagery like this no more. Is that what you're telling me? Oh my goodness. The two figureheads of the X-Men series, Professor X and Magneto, were long rumored to be stand-ins for African-American civil rights leaders, Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. This rumor, pervasive as it is unfortunately just that. Though the opposing mutants share some tangential similarities with both activists, some. We'll get to that in a minute. The characters were in fact based on two famous Israeli prime ministers, David Ben-Gurion and Menachem Begin. X-Men, as we all know, were created in 1963 by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby at the height of the civil rights movement in the United States. Where these two guys were involved. The mutants that make up the team were used as a thinly veiled allegory for minorities, and over the years have stood for many oppressed groups in America with different sexual orientations, ethnic backgrounds, and even religious beliefs. But to say that both men are based on Dr. King and Malcolm X is false. longtime X-Men writer Chris Claremont stated as much in a 2016 interview with Empire Online. There's a lot of talk online now that Magneto stands in for Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Professor X. But for me, being an immigrant, white, to make that analogy felt incredibly presumptuous. Claremont states an equivalent analogy could be made to Menachem Begin as Magneto, evolving through his life from a terrorist in 1947 to the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize 30 years later. Claremont went on to say that his goal for Magneto was to eventually become Xavier's successor as leader of the X-Men and headmaster of Xavier's School of the Gifted. David Ben-Gurion was Israel's first prime minister, holding office between 1948 and 1954. He's well known for being the primary national founder of the State of Israel. His accomplishments include encouraging other Jews in the diaspora to move to Israel and improving relations with West Germany along with the rest of the world. By contrast, Menachem Begin was the leader of the Zionist military group Irgun, which revolted against the British government in charge of then Palestine in 1944. While the Irgun was classified by the British as a terrorist group at the time, Begin was eventually elected as prime minister in 1977. I remember that, and brokered a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, for which he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The last detail of Begin's life in particular was an inspiration for Claremont in writing Magneto. That evolution was something I wanted to apply to that relationship between Xavier and Magneto. It's an evolving 150 issue arc. Now, without getting into a whole lot of detail about Ben-Gurion or Begin, one was petitioning for peace. One was trying to achieve that same peace and equality through terrorism or through being aggressive. So, Chris Claremont says it is an analogy of Begin and Ben-Gurion. Okay. Chris Claremont, perhaps the most influential X-Men writer of all time, says what he believes. Is he saying what he believes or is he saying what he knows? And because if Chris Claremont says it, it must be the truth. Okay. I am not going to argue whether or not Chris Claremont is telling the truth or not, because I don't think it's a truth or lie issue. It's a my opinion, your opinion issue. The only people who actually know what they were trying to do and what they were drawing inspiration from for the X-Men are Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. So since 1963, the prevailing rumor has been that Magneto and Professor X are patterned, or Malcolm X are patterned after Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Okay. Now, if I look at it, I mean, if I really look at it, I'm just gonna pull an image down here. Okay. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X met one time in person, face to face, 1964, March of 1964, in Harlem. Okay. They were both sort of in a revelation about what they should be doing as far as civil rights. Malcolm was disillusioned by the events that took place regarding the Minister Muhammad, and Martin Luther King was dealing with what he was dealing with because he was peaceful and everybody saw him as a target or a mark. But it didn't stop him from doing what he was trying to do or attempting to do. Professor Xavier grew up in a very cushy lifestyle. He was formerly educated and immediately jumped in to his fight to fight for mutants. Martin Luther King lived a similar life. Malcolm X, on the other hand, even though he lived in a home that had strong beliefs about things like Marcus Garvey, and both of their fathers were pastors, Malcolm X's father was murdered by what they believed to be white nationalists. His mother was institutionalized, so eventually Malcolm X, Malcolm Little at the time, fell into a life of crime and wasn't introduced to the Nation of Islam until he was in prison. Magneto, Auschwitz. So their lives aren't similar? When Magneto became Magneto and started to form the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, wasn't it mutant rights by any means necessary? Wasn't it? Somebody tell me different. Okay, let's put it like this. Mr. Claremont, Misters Lee and Kirby may not have intentionally been saying, hey, we're patterning our two mutant leaders after King and X, but it certainly seems like they could have been. They're too similar. They're too similar. Now, Begin and Ben Gurion, if that's the comparison, and that's what Lord Claremont says, then I guess those of us that don't want to ruffle Claremont's feathers are just going to have to go with it. And intent, again, is not to ruffle anybody's feathers, but it definitely is a much cooler comparison to compare them to Malcolm X and MLK Jr. So, what do y'all believe? Okay. First, I urge you to do your research. Look it up, read up on it in its entirety. Do your research and see if a lot of this tracks. If it does, then you can be converted to a Ben Gurion, Begin type belief. But if you feel like the analogy that's the strongest, the analogy that is the most prominent, the analogy that has endured for most of the X-Men's existence, then you can just keep rocking with the opinion of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Are they two sides of the same coin? They may not have intentionally been meant to be two sides of the same coin for Xavier and Magneto, but it certainly tracks that way. And it would be real difficult trying to disprove it. So we believe what we believe until somebody comes out and says, shut up, believe in that. That's where I'm at right now. Again, I got plenty of comment space. Go ahead and drop them comments and tell me what you believe as far as Malcolm X and Martin Luther King being the basis for Xavier and Magneto versus David Ben Gurion and Menachem Begin. That's it for now, y'all, but fret not. I will be coming at you with another one of them other ones, and until I do, y'all be good to each other. Cue the music.